Margaret Calloway never asked for attention. She never wanted a trophy on her shelf or a story written about her name. She was the kind of woman who showed up early and left late, who remembered which patient liked their blanket folded a certain way, and who never once called in sick, even when her back hurt so badly that she had to stop between hallways just to breathe through the pain. She had been a nurse for 28 years. Most of those years were spent at Ridgewood Valley Medical Center, a small hospital tucked between two hills in eastern Tennessee. The hospital had 3 floors, 2 waiting rooms, a parking lot that flooded every spring, and a staff that felt more like a family than a team. Maggie, as everyone called her, was the anchor of the night shift. When younger nurses panicked during emergencies, they looked for Maggie. When doctors couldn't find a vein, they called for Maggie. When a patient was terrified and crying at 2 in the morning, Maggie was the one who pulled up a chair and stayed. She had grown up poor in Harlan County, Kentucky. Her father worked in a coal mine, and her mother cleaned houses on weekends to make extra money. There were 4 children in the Calloway home, and Maggie was the oldest. She learned early that life required patience, and that complaining rarely changed anything. When her youngest brother nearly died of pneumonia at age 7, a nurse named Carol stayed by his side through the night, checking his oxygen, adjusting his fluids, speaking softly to him when he cried. Maggie watched Carol from the corner of the room and decided, right then, that she would spend her life doing exactly that. She trained at a community college, took out loans, worked 2 jobs during her first 3 years of nursing, and never once considered quitting. She raised her daughter mostly alone after her marriage ended. Her daughter, Nina, grew up watching her mother leave for work before sunrise and return after dark, and she grew up understanding that her mother's work was not just a job, it was a calling. On the night of November 14, 2019, Maggie was working the late shift alone on the 3rd floor. It was a quiet Thursday. 2 other nurses were on lower floors, a single doctor was on call in the East Wing, and the security guard had stepped outside to his car to eat his dinner. The hallways were still. The overhead lights hummed softly. Maggie was updating charts at the nurses' station when the emergency entrance doors at the end of the corridor crashed open. 3 men walked in fast. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces covered with ski masks. The one in front was holding a gun. He pointed it directly at Maggie without slowing his step. She did not scream. She did not run. She set down her pen. The man with the gun stopped at the nurses' station and demanded that she open the pharmaceutical storage room. He knew exactly what was inside. He told her that if she cooperated, no one would get hurt. His voice was rough and impatient, and the other 2 men stood behind him like shadows, watching the hallway on both sides. Maggie looked at the gun. She looked at the man holding it. Then she looked past him, toward the hallway where room 7 was located. A young woman named Dana had been in labor for 6 hours. A man on a ventilator in room 12 needed to be checked every 30 minutes. An elderly gentleman in room 9, a retired teacher named Herbert, had pressed his call button 20 minutes ago, and Maggie had been about to go to him. She could not leave. She would not leave. What happened in the next 9 minutes was recorded by the hospital's security cameras and confirmed later by all 3 men who were in that hallway. Maggie did not fight. She did not attempt to reach for any alarm. She simply started talking. She spoke the way she always spoke to frightened people, slowly and without panic, as though she had all the time in the world. She told the men that she understood. They must be in a difficult situation to have come to a hospital at night with a gun. She told them that she was not going to pretend she was not scared, because she was. But she also told them that she needed them to understand something. She described Dana, in room 7. She told them that Dana was 23 years old, that this was her first baby, and that Dana's husband was deployed overseas and did not yet know that his wife had gone into labor early. She told them about the man on the ventilator, that his name was Robert, and that he was 61 years old and had worked as a bus driver for 30 years before his lungs gave out. She told them about Herbert in room 9, that he was 82 and sharp as a tack, and had a photograph of his late wife pinned above his bed. She said these things calmly and without drama, the way someone recites things they know by heart. The man with the gun told her to stop talking and open the cabinet. She took one small step toward the cabinet, but she kept talking. She said that she had been a nurse for a long time, and that she had seen what pain could do to a person. She said she had seen young men and women come through that hospital because of the very substances they were trying to take. She said she did not blame them. She said she believed people usually ended up in dark places because of something that had already happened to them, not because of who they were. The youngest of the three men shifted. His eyes, the only part of him visible above the mask, were wet. The leader told him to stay focused. Maggie noticed the younger man. She spoke directly to him without pointing, without making it obvious. She asked, quietly, whether any of them had family, whether there was someone at home who was worried about them. The younger man looked at the floor. 9 minutes after they had entered the hallway, the youngest robber stepped forward. He placed himself between Maggie and the man with the gun and said, in a voice that cracked in the middle, that they were done, that this was wrong, that he was not going to do this. An argument broke out between the three men. It was sharp and fast. In the chaos, Maggie moved 2 steps to her left, slid her hand beneath the counter shelf, and pressed a silent alarm that no one had noticed her working toward during the entire conversation. Then she walked down the hallway to room 7 to check on Dana. She did not run, she walked. By the time police arrived less than 7 minutes later, 2 of the men were still in the parking lot, frozen in argument. The youngest had already left on foot. The following morning, he walked into the police station alone and turned himself in. His name was Dylan Marsh. He was 22 years old. His father was a decorated veteran of the United States Army. Maggie gave her statement to the officers, refused a medical evaluation, and finished her shift. When Nina called 3 days later after hearing about the incident on a local news station, Maggie told her that the baby in room 7 had been born healthy, a boy, and that Dana had named him James after her husband. Maggie said that was the story. Nina said that her mother was the most impossible woman she had ever known, and that she meant that as the highest possible compliment. The local news covered the incident for a day or two, then moved on. Maggie asked the hospital to keep her name out of any press releases. She returned to her rounds the following week, as though nothing had happened. The story might have ended there, but stories like this one have a way of continuing underground, moving quietly through the people they touch. Gary Marsh was sitting at his kitchen table in Knoxville when his son Dylan, during a phone call from the detention facility, told him what had happened in that hallway. Gary had served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He had seen courage in many forms. He had seen men run into fire for strangers. He had seen soldiers hold their composure under conditions that would have broken most people. But when Dylan described a small woman in scrubs, standing alone in a hospital hallway, with no weapon and no backup, speaking to 3 armed strangers as though they were still worth reaching, Gary sat quietly for a long time after he hung up the phone. He started asking around. It took him a few weeks to find her name. When he did, he brought it to his veterans support group, a gathering of men and women whose service spanned from Vietnam to the most recent overseas conflicts. Some were young, some walked with canes, one used a wheelchair. They ranged in rank from private to colonel. They had spent their careers in uniform, trained to recognize courage in its many forms. They agreed, without much discussion, that they wanted to do something. Not a ceremony, not a press event, just something that came from them. On a Tuesday morning in April 2021, Maggie Calloway arrived for her shift at Ridgewood Valley Medical Center and found the parking lot transformed. On both sides of the path from her car to the entrance, 18 people stood at attention. Some were in uniform, some wore medals pinned to civilian jackets. One sat straight in his wheelchair, his back as rigid as a flagpole. They were facing forward, quiet, waiting. Maggie stopped walking. She looked down the 2 lines of people and did not understand, at first, what she was seeing. Gary Marsh stepped forward from the end of the row. He was a tall man, with gray at his temples and hands that had seen hard work. He told her that his son had told him what she did. He told her that his son was getting help, and that part of the reason Dylan had chosen to walk into that police station on his own was because of the way she had spoken to him, because she had treated him like a person who was still capable of making a better choice. Gary said that the people standing in that parking lot had spent their lives learning that courage was not the absence of fear. It was doing the right thing anyway, even when you had every reason not to. He said that what she had done in that hallway, alone, with nothing but her voice, was exactly that. He said that she had protected her patients the way a soldier protects their post, and that they wanted her to know they had not forgotten. He stepped back into line. Then, together, all 18 of them raised their right hands in salute. Maggie Calloway stood in that parking lot in her faded blue scrubs and her worn white shoes, and she looked at each face, one by one, taking her time the way she took her time with everything. A few of the veterans were blinking hard. Gary Marsh's jaw was tight. The man in the wheelchair had his chin lifted toward the sky. Maggie nodded slowly, the same nod she gave patients when she wanted them to know they were going to be all right. Then she pressed her hand flat against her chest, and she cried. She was asked later, in a quiet interview that she agreed to only reluctantly, what had been going through her mind during those 9 minutes in the hallway. She took a moment before answering. She said she had been thinking about Dana in room 7. She had been thinking about Robert on the ventilator. She had been thinking about Herbert and his photograph. She said she had also been thinking that nobody in that hallway had woken up that morning wanting their life to turn out the way it was turning out. Not the men with masks, not her, not anyone. She said she had just been doing her job. There is a photograph that circulates quietly, not on the front page of newspapers, not trending on any platform, but passed from one person to another by people who needed to see it. In the photograph, a gray Tennessee morning hangs over a small parking lot. 2 rows of men and women stand at attention. Some are old, some are young. One is in a wheelchair. All of their right hands are raised. In the center of it all stands a woman in blue scrubs. Her hand is on her heart. Her eyes are closed. She is not famous. She never wanted to be. She is a nurse from Harlan County who learned a long time ago that every person in front of her, no matter the hour or the condition or the circumstances, deserves to be treated like they are still worth something. 18 veterans agree.